Ireland's GDP has grown rapidly since Charlie McCreevy reduced the Irish corporate tax rate from 32% to 12.5% in the 1999 Finance Act. The phenomenon resulting, termed Celtic Tiger, has been beneficial to the people of Ireland, many skilled immigrants, and companies alike. Sounds like a win-win to us, but the G7 seems to disagree.
The European Union always tried to harmonize taxes in the European Union because they feel like tax competition within the European Union is not a good idea because you have countries like Ireland that have 12.5% corporate tax rate, and you have Hungary as the lowest in the European Union with 9%. They provide access to the European Union, but at a much more competitive rate.
On June 5, 2021, the G7 agreed on a global tax rate of 15%. They suggested that multinationals should pay their fair share of tax in the countries they do business. What does this mean? It means that the G7 is planning to tax companies based on where they operate, rather than where they are registered. They also said an agreement on the global tax reform was necessary to prevent big companies like Google, Facebook, and Apple from dodging taxes by locating themselves in tax havens like Ireland, Switzerland, or Luxembourg.
So if you have a bottle of French wine and you drink it on your couch at home, under the new rules, this is where the value would be created. You would sit on your couch, you would enjoy the wine, you'd be the user of that wine. With the old system, the value of that bottle of wine was created in France by the winemaker who has centuries of experience in how to make the best wine. And for the European Union and the bureaucrats in Brussels, this was always a big problem. Unfortunately for them, all those efforts to harmonize those tax rates failed because of the unanimity standards. And so those countries always voted against. They decided, we could try to work with the OECD on some form of a global tax agreement that would cover the way we tax corporations, but it would also, in Pillar 2, impose a global minimum tax.
The picture is no different on the other side of the pond. The Biden administration has been particularly eager to reach an agreement because a global minimum tax is closely tied to their plans to raise the corporate tax rate in the United States to 28%, up from 21%. But surely he knows that will make competition worse for American companies. Then why does he want to do it?
When Biden came into office, he saw that he has the same problem essentially as the European Union. And so he decided, if I want to raise taxes domestically, the US will be less competitive than before. And so it might be a good idea to have a high global minimum tax in order to artificially protect the US and make sure it remains competitive. And I think that is the more important reason, is that he discovered that this is a good way to form a tax cartel to restrict and essentially eliminate competition. But even China, even communist China, has a lower rate than what Biden is proposing. He needs all that revenue for his spending spree. He proposed close to $3 trillion in new spending.
The answer is to help pay for the president's infrastructure proposal. According to a Treasury Department report on Biden's Made in America tax plan, 7 of the top 10 locations for U.S. multinational companies were in countries that apply much lower taxes. For example, Bermuda holds 10% of all reported U.S. multinational foreign profit.
Currently, we have the physical presence standard in place, and that basically means that a company gets taxed wherever its physical headquarters are. And so Facebook and Google and Amazon and others, they're based in the US, so they get taxed here. And with the new Pillar 1 proposal, some of those taxing rights would be given to other nations where the users of those companies are located. The reason for that is that under the new OECD proposal, they say that the value of those companies is not created when they're in the US, in their headquarters, and they're manufacturing or they're developing new apps and new programs and new services that people then can use, but the value is rather being created by the user in those countries. So the user is adding the value to the company and not the company who develops those services.
Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform, said cartels that keep prices high hurt consumers. Creating a tax OPEC of governments to avoid tax competition is bad for citizens and taxpayers. Competition drives out self-serving rent seekers in business and in government. Putting a floor on the costs of the government is like putting a floor on the cost of oil or wheat. Bad for consumers. Why create a new OPEC? That's right. That's exactly right. A new cartel. A group of big countries with the purpose of maintaining prices at a high level and restricting competition. This agreement would significantly damage the valuable tax competition among countries and would cause harm to businesses, workers, and economies around the world. A global minimum tax would greatly diminish the force of tax competition. This competition is not only good, but also necessary, because it offers a critical check on the power of governments, and it is vital for ensuring efficient and reasonable levels of taxation. But there's another aspect of this competition that we care about, that of the consumer. If governments start imposing a global minimum tax, it will devastate many small businesses. Many large companies are happy with the global tax rate suggestion because first, they can afford it, and second, they can impose the extra costs on their larger consumer bases. Small businesses cannot do that.
So there could be countries like China and others that might take advantage of the new rules and say, well, if we fundamentally change things, then why can't we have a user tax for everyone who drives a car on Chinese roads? Why can't we have a user tax for everyone who uses an iPhone in China? And so this is very, very short-sighted, and it's very, very dangerous because those new rules could be flipped around to your disadvantage in the long term. It's all about the narrative and the narrative they can push. And especially the European Union is very, very good at identifying a narrative that works with citizens, even though it might not be true at all. So for example, they push the narrative that American multinationals are not paying their fair share. So they didn't even say what fair share is, and it's very subjective, and people might disagree on what is fair, but they say they're not paying their fair share. So we looked actually at the effective corporate tax rates of those companies and compared them to the effective corporate tax rates of other European digital companies and also non-digital companies. And turns out that American multinationals often pay a higher effective corporate tax rates than non-digital or digital companies. So that narrative is not true. And again, the same applies here with the tax havens, so-called tax havens. Those countries are not tax havens. They just decide, because they're sovereign nations, they just decide that the way they want to run their country and economy is maybe with a smaller government, maybe more efficient, and with low tax rates, so they attract other businesses and they can push their economy that way. Currently, we have the physical presence standard in place, and that basically means that a company gets taxed wherever its physical headquarters are. And so Facebook and Google and Amazon and others, they're based in the US, so they get taxed here. This is why it's so dangerous, because it's a very short-sighted proposal that might create revenue for some European and other nations in the short term, but in the long term, no one really knows if we change those fundamental principles, long-standing principles, what will happen to companies that are located in the US or in Europe that are currently not under this proposal. And so there could be countries like China and others that might take advantage of the new rules and say, well, if we fundamentally change things, then why can't we have a user tax for everyone who drives a car on Chinese roads? Why can't we have a user tax for everyone who uses an iPhone in China?
It is indeed a short-sighted policy, but the European Union will tell us otherwise. Do you remember the European Commission's legal battle with Apple? It is not over. The EU is not happy with big companies operating in Europe. As the discussion continues, we should keep an eye on these types of tax policies. In the end, we consumers pay the price for government's bad decisions, not them. You know the cost of freedom is eternal vigilance. Do you agree with this minimum global tax rate suggestion? In your opinion, would it hurt or help consumers? Let us know what you think in the comments.